I think what really like messed with me in that sense was that I didn't have, outside of the classrooms, like that
Can you hear the audio now?
Yes, it's perfect.
Thank you.
classroom, that space, I didn't have anyone to follow up with on those conversations. Because even like some of my peers within that classroom who had that same experience, like wouldn't talk about it. It was like weird, like we just walked inside of the classroom for like an hour doing like just walking. And we never talked about it afterward, which I look back, it was kind of weird. Like, why didn't we just talk about why we did that? But yeah, it was that like I had follow-ups with you, of course, and like Sylvia, who was also like, maybe not at the time, but like in college, we had those guys.
After the fact, yeah.
Yeah, but like in high school, I didn't really have that, so it was kind of hard for me to like, even if I wanted to talk about any of those experiences, it was hard to even strike up that conversation because it was just like, well, it's something we did today in class.
But after the fact, it could exist, it could have not, you know, but this might just be like a really repressed dream that we all had, but no one remembers, you know? And it's like, no, seriously, you know, like, or I like to think about things in layers, like you were mentioning earlier, right? Like, you think about how like wild the world is, and you're just like wow, I'm existing right now, having this conversation with these two people that have meant the world to me right now, that I've met in high school, that I wasn't planning to go to, and then you go back and back and back and back, and you're just like, dude, this exists like all together right now. And that's why I think the existence of a teaching practice in the form of is a form of conceptual art, you know, because none of it could exist, or even if it didn't, you know, like, who's going to question it? Like Alex said, he's like, who's going to question anything about it? Who's gonna ask these questions? What are the questions to ask? You know, like, I don't know. I think, give me 1 second. I think the concept of conceptual art and teaching is having something exist for the moment, and then taking it for what you will, rooting it wherever you want to root it, you know, thinking of ourselves as these like gardens of ever-growing things, you know, like if you basically in that activity is like giving us like just walk around, like you gave us some lavender plants and we're like, all right, do what you want. And some people chose to like put it in the back of their minds, and you know, Alex is now thinking about it like, oh dude, that was weird, you know, like we just did that. Or like people like Alex said, like our peers who were just like, nah, like I don't care. If you mention them to them, they're like, I don't remember. Like, what are you talking about? Camacho's class was just a blur. Like, nothing. I don't even remember anything. Like, what did she teach us? You know, like, I don't know. I think that's where my mind goes. I think the impulsive sense of just doing anything has left with me, you know? Where I just like I said earlier, you know, about like teaching students and to not be scared, you know, I'm just like, do it. Why not? Like, yeah. Why? Like there's no limits right now. Like, if you mess up, you mess up. It's not like no one's gonna scold you, no one's gonna do nothing. You just start over. And you know, that guy really just that's what left on me, you know, where he's like, do it because you can.
It was like a confidence builder in a weird way.
To answer the question, I feel like I just want to say the thing that Jorge already said in some ways. You know? I'm like, okay, well, like, yeah, I guess the way I understand this is the way that you taught me how to understand it, through your teaching, through the way that, like, you talk about conceptual art, through the way that you practice both, right? Like, that's sort of how I've come to understand, like, what that is like through a lot of what he's done. And then in relationship to that, what we've done. Maybe like the thing though that we want to ask ourselves now, that is almost different, and maybe like the question that is more important to how we do this, right, is not like what happens, but like what do we do with what happens. We both take this question really seriously, and it's something that we live with. We live with it through our day-to-day conversations. We live with it as we sit at different sides of the table.
You know, and I think what you're saying is that we trust one another and care about this work and really care about these ideas, but also we care about the genealogy of these ideas and the ways that we know and experience them.
Yeah.
And so maybe that fear of failure is rooted in the like care and the love and the respect.
I hope it comes from a place of caring, right? I hope that's where it's coming from. I don't want it to be coming from a place of self-interest or something, you know? But there's always the risk that it is. Like, so it's like, that's why we in education and in other areas talk about things like self-reflexivity, and, you know, I guess in feminist studies, probably first was that theorized, but I guess in my heart, what I want to happen at the intersection of conceptual art and teaching is for the practices of both teaching and making art to somehow, I mean, I don't know how to say it other than like a generative force, like something that like moves us. For me, like it's broad and specific to say that. And maybe like the thing that makes it seem radical in the way that Jorge talks about radical is that it's rooted in like love and care. But I think that like it'd be really hard for me to like sit here and talk about all these things without like thinking about like, oh yeah, but I know this, I feel this way, I know this because I've experienced it so many times before. And so like I guess the other thing that happens is that at this intersection is that when we acknowledge the intersection, when we point at it, we say, hey, there is something here, and there are people here too, and there's also thinking about what happens here. Mm-hmm. And if we acknowledge that, then that collective force moves us maybe further, differently. I don't know, like maybe the point is not further, maybe it's just it moves us like in ways we wouldn't be able to move along.
Yeah.
Right?
And I think that does kind of play into the thing that we're constantly talking about, whether it's learning from others, learning from each other, like in the way that we think about these ways, these points of contact, these like relationships that are built that then continue to inform. I almost am thinking of like this blob that's kind of like swaying. I don't know if you've like been in a show and like can move in one direction or another.
If you're not careful, you'll get sick.
Or get trampled, as was the case in one of the first concerts I went to.
Or trample someone else.
But I think that's important because you do need to still be aware, like you can't just get lost in the general force, but it's like being aware constantly. It's like thinking about the attunement, constant thinking about like what you're citing, who you're in conversation with, where things are coming from, and where are we pulling from in order to create and cultivate that? Because it can't only ever just be, us in a text or us and each other, because there are all of these other ways. And what are the other extrasensorial ways that then we also incorporate into this like collective generative force?
And that's why like imagination is so important, right? Because we have to imagine these things. We have to conceive of them in our minds a lot of times. However, what you're also saying to me, it's more than, it's not just a mind thing. It's always a mind-body thing.
I would hope, right, that we don't think of this attunement or this calibration or this orientation as this fixed kind of point, but rather like a thing that we're constantly recalibrating, right? Like if I'm gonna sit and play my ukulele with my niece and nephew this weekend, it's like I have to tune it up so that even the orientation and the attunement isn't a fixed orientation, because we're always also being informed by other things that are then informing the recalibration process.
Yeah.
And that then might open up further possibilities. It's probably not in the foreground. It doesn't mean that it's not there. And it doesn't mean that maybe that won't get shifted into the foreground, won't take more of a central role like later. It just depends on where we're at and where our calibration is.
Zoom screen disappears into a workspace with a computer screen and an iPad in front of it. On the computer screen are 4 different screens. On the iPad, we zoom in, we see a 2-faced figure. They are pulling a pamphlet in front of their face. There are bars on top of the iPad that go horizontal. Back to the workspace on the computer. We see pixelation of that workspace zooming in and out. We see someone with a Gatorade bottle. They're drinking out of the bottle.
The finger taps a screen showing a text message thread. Me too! ! Text message thread multiplied, tiled 9 times. Animated drawings of rectangles appear on the screen. Back to one version of the text message thread. A person laughs in the upper left-hand corner. We're back to text message thread 2, animated drawings this time. There is a cloud on the right-hand corner in orange colors with a blue background.
We see faces next to another face that's just inverted on top of each other. Now this face repeats itself in 9 different screens, maybe 35, 45, who knows? There's some sort of focal point that all these screens are going towards in the center of our screens. We see some sort of pixelated text message, maybe the one from before on the left, and 3 different screens on the right. We see a bunch of different screens with lights flashing green and pink and blue.
2 figures have a conversation on the right side of the screen, horizontal static on the iPad screen. The 2 figures now tiled to 4, back to 2, but overlapped, tiled multiplied again, flipped horizontally. There's distortion obstructing the content of the background. There's a figure replicated 3 times. The image is staggered and stacked on top of one another. There's an overlap of a figure with 2 faces multiplied by 5, back to the screen, and we are done.
In my Taino Gods book, one of the biggest takeaways for me was the story of Yayael and his father. So Yayael grew envy for his father, and he wanted power over the stars in the sky for himself. So he attempted to slay his father, but then his father, even in almost being dead, was healed by serpents, and then was born from the mouth of an enormous plumed serpent, and then banished his son to forever live a life without purpose, and ultimately had to murder his son through self-protection and self-defense. But then, even in death, Yayael was held by his mother as she grieved over his dead body, and in being reborn through death, Yayael was turned into a fish-like soul and transformed into another light of the great tree. My takeaway from this story is that there's always love, there's always forgiveness, there is always dark and there's always light. I think taking a gift away from the moon is that we are both our light and our dark sides, as the moon can be both full And then once the new moon hits, it's showing its dark side. You know, we are full, we are the moon. Thank you. Okay, so starting today's reading.
Oh, hello. Okay, very well. Happy birthday. Happy birthday.
We have courage, cycle, celebration, and flow.
It seems like things are starting to flip on you, you know? They're trying to switch it up on you because they're trying to bring out some courage, something that's deep within you, that's already there, that's already known. But sometimes you have to fight, sometimes you have to push through because there are different cycles, different moon cycles, different shadow sides trying to get through to you, trying to help heal you so you can start celebrating your life more every day. You need to fly like a bird. You need to see your wings are already attached to you. No matter what anyone says, keep going with the flow, okay? Keep going with the flow because you are guided, you are loved. There are spirit guides all around you. They're above you, they're below, they're behind you, they're in front of you. Just know, flow.
So for my response, I'd like to take up one of the questions that Angela and Paulina referred to in their video work. And I quote, "It is more important to how we do this, not like what happens, but what do we do with what happens," end quote. And I think this is significant, not only because I'm doing a response, but also because I see this echoed throughout their video work, where there is this constant stream of things intersecting, things happening, but we don't get to dwell too long on any one thing. So for example, in an early part of their video, there's this simulated dialogic exchange over a messenger app, and the Word document is even pulled up at one point. And in all of that, we get the sensation that something is happening, things are being talked about and pointed to, but it happens so quickly that we don't get to really dwell and focus on each thing that goes on. And the sense that I get in all of that is that this act of pointing to is what really matters. And along that line, the response is probably also another way of pointing to things, a gesturing towards something that may or may not be there. And so in calling something out, you can say that there is almost an effective interaction that goes on, a response that shifts our attention and compels us to kind of react to things. And I see this happening both in the respondent and in the audience of the response as well. And this act of pointing to is probably more than just a signaling of what is there, but in this kind of capacity to reframe things in our experience in relation to our kind of subjective thesis, uses an ability to create new moments of interaction, intersecting moments that create new intersections. And so I echo again, what are we doing with what happens?